Hi, everybody. My name is Sandra Brett, and on behalf of the Charleston Jewish Film Fest, happy Hanukkah. Thank you for attending our program tonight, and welcome to tonight's discussion of They Ain't Ready For Me. Many thanks to our co-sponsors for this event, the Pearlstein Lipoff Center for Southern Jewish Culture, the Yaschik Arnold Jewish Studies Program, African American Studies, Women and Gender Studies Program, Religious Studies at the College of Charleston, as well as the Stanley Farbstein Endowment Fund and the Charleston JCC Foundation. So thanks to all those people that make tonight's program possible. And of course, thanks to all of you for coming. I hope that you will join us for some future Film Fest movies. My email address is in the chat. You can always email to find out what's coming next, or you can check for updates on our Facebook page. And there's still time to register for the Hanukkah Film Festival, which is going on right now. You'll have access to 11 great movies through Sunday. It started a couple days ago, but you still have access to all the movies. So that website info is also in the chat. And all you have to do is put CHSFF in the checkout to get a discount. And there's some really great movies. Also, be sure to join a Jewish Studies program this Sunday, which is a conversation with Shaul Magid. I believe that's at 10 a.m. That should be in the chat as well. So if you have any questions, either email Kim or me. And now what we've all been waiting for, our conversation with featured guests, Rabbi Tamar Manasseh and filmmaker Brad Rothschild will be discussing They Ain't Ready For Me. And our moderator tonight is Professor Ashley Walters. Professor Walters is assistant professor in the Jewish Studies program and the director of the Pearlstein Lipoff Center for Southern Jewish Culture. So I'm going to turn this program over to Professor Walters.
Hi, everyone. I'm just thrilled by this turnout, and thank you so much to Sandra and Kim for helping make this program happen. I'm so excited to be joined by Brad Rothschild and Rabbi Tamar Manasseh. We've been talking about doing this event for a very long time, and so I'm so thrilled to be here, and we're finally doing this. So what I wanted to do was introduce our guests of honor in just a minute, but first I'd like to explain how tonight's gathering is going to work. I'm going to take the liberty of beginning tonight's conversation by asking Tamar and Brad some questions. After that, I'll begin taking questions from the audience. We have a very strong student turnout tonight, so I will be prioritizing questions from students. But what we'd like you to do is type the questions into the chat box, and Kim and I will be monitoring the chat box throughout the talk. As we work our way through the questions, I will invite you to unmute yourself and ask them. In the case that you are unable to speak up or you'd prefer that I ask the question for you, I'm more than happy to read the question. Our goal is to get through as many questions as we can in 1 hour. We will be recording the session and it will be available on YouTube in the next couple of days. So to help us avoid any unintended audio, please double check that your microphone is on mute. So it's a real pleasure for me to be introducing our guests of honor. You probably already know a bit about Tamar, thanks to Brad's beautiful film, but in case you haven't had the chance to view it just yet, let me share a little bit about Tamar and her work. Tamar Manasseh is a Chicago-based rabbi who's leading the fight against senseless killings on the south side of Chicago. Inspired by the shooting death of fellow mom Lucille Barnes in 2015, every day Rabbi Manasseh sits on the corner of 75th Street and South Stewart Avenue in the Englewood section of Chicago. Tired of waiting for politicians to do something, Tamar took the situation into her own hands. She did something simple yet revolutionary. She sat down on the corner and she hasn't left since. She's since founded MASK, Mothers/Men Against Senseless Killings. MASK's purpose is to put eyes on the streets, interrupt violence and crime, and teach children to grow up as friends rather than enemies. And MASK's primary mission is to build stronger communities through a focus on violence prevention, food insecurity, and housing. MASK partners to ensure that community members have access to necessary city services, opportunities for education and professional skills growth, and economic development. And MASK is on the move. MASK initiatives have popped up in other Chicago neighborhoods as well as cities throughout the nation, including Evansville, Indiana, Staten Island, New York, and Memphis, Tennessee. I'm also excited to introduce director-producer Brad Rothschilds. He is an award-winning producer and writer with both a creative and a business background. He received a master's in international affairs and a master's in business administration, both from Columbia and New York. From 1995 to 1997, he served as the speechwriter and director of communications for the mission of Israel to the United Nations. Brad has produced the award-winning documentary feature Kinderblock 66, Return to Buchenwald, which screened in the Jerusalem Film Festival and in over 20 festivals around the world. Brad directed the documentary film African Exodus about the plight of Israel's African refugees, and the documentary film Tree Man about the people who come to New York City to sell Christmas trees every holiday season. Tree Man won the Audience Award at the St. Lawrence International Film Festival, and he is currently directing a documentary film about Raoul Wallenberg. And then finally, we have a surprise guest tonight. We're very honored to welcome Rabbi Capers Funnye. We're very honored to have Rabbi Capers in our audience. Rabbi Capers is a South Carolina native. He's born in Georgetown, South Carolina, before moving to Chicago. He is the spiritual leader of Shalom B'nai Zaken Ethiopian Hebrew congregation in Chicago, one of the oldest and largest African-American Jewish congregations in the U.S. Rabbi Funnye has been a guest of the Jewish Studies program here at the college in the past, and we would be very, very eager to welcome him here again in the near future. So thank you so much for joining us tonight. And we would really like, in fact, Tamar requests that you join the conversation with us tonight. So this is a real treat for us. So welcome, everyone. What I'd like to do is just begin at the beginning of your two projects and hear a little bit about how the two of you got started. So perhaps, Tamar, you could tell us about how you ended up sitting on a street corner and how this gesture has evolved into what is now a nationwide movement.
I ended up sitting on a street corner because I was a scared mom and because I'm a Jew, right? And I've learned that over the years, sometimes being Black says that, something could be done. But being Jewish says something absolutely can be done. But being human, you put that all together and you must do something. Something has to be done. So it was kind of like, I'd sat and waited for years and I waited for politicians and I waited for members of the clergy and I waited for different organizations to fix the violence problem in Chicago. And at that point, my kids were still young enough where I drove them everywhere and I knew all of their friends. And as they started to get older and they didn't need me to helicopter mom them anymore, it was too difficult for me to send them out into a city that was so unpredictable, where so many mothers just like me who love their kids, who prayed for their kids, who were good parents, were losing their kids every day. That was too much for me. I just couldn't do that. And so I had to go and figure out, how do I keep my kids safe in Chicago? And I quickly learned that in order to keep my kids safe in Chicago, I have to keep their friends safe too. And I have to keep the friends of the friends safe too. So I had to figure out what was going on. And the thing was, you can't fix anything if you don't know what the actual problem is. And for me, I needed to be in it. I needed to be able to see what was going on around me. So me fixing the problem wasn't going to happen with me sitting in my living room or sitting behind my desk. I had to actually go out into it. I had to see the world that my kids were going out into for me to understand what was wrong with it. And so sitting on that corner, I immersed myself in it. I had to understand what was going on in order for me to help. And I learned a lot when I was sitting there. And it wasn't just about guns. It wasn't just about gun violence. It was so many things that contributed to that. So it's like mass quickly turned into something so much bigger than fighting senseless killings. It became about finding housing for homeless teens. It became about making sure people had food to eat in food deserts. It became about education. It became about job training. It became about all of the things that contribute to creating gun violence. So it changed really quickly once I got there. And it's kind of like, there are 75th and Stewarts all over the country. In every major city in America, there are 75th and Stewarts. So what we do on that corner has grown into this national movement because it happens everywhere. And everyone everywhere is looking for answers. And we'd like to think that on that corner, we've actually created an answer. So yeah, that's the long and short of how I got there.
So I have so many follow-up questions for you, but I do want to invite Brad to join the conversation and talk about at what point did you hear about this project? How did you hear about Tamar, and when did you decide to perhaps make a film about her?
Yeah, so I read an article in the JTA, the Jewish Telegraphic Agency, puts out an email every day where they have a roundup of news stories from around the Jewish world, in particular in the United States. And it was October 2016. I saw an article that was entitled "Black Rabbinical Student Leads Army of Moms Against Gun Violence in Chicago." And my attention was captured, and I clicked on the link, and at the top of the article was a picture of this striking woman named Tamar Manasseh. And I went on to read about the incredible work that she was doing to combat gun violence on the South Side of Chicago, and the organization Mask, Mothers and Men Against Senseless Killing, that she created. And as I'm reading the article, what really struck me was when Tamar credited her Judaism for her activism. And I thought to myself, this is an interesting person who I want to know more about. And I have to say that I felt immediately that she would make a good subject for a documentary film. Her personality jumped out at me from this article. So, not knowing her at all and not knowing anybody who knew her, I did what any enterprising person would do in the era that we're living in. And I went online and I found her on social media, and I found her organization's website, and I reached out to her a bunch of different ways. I sent her an email to Mask's website, and I introduced myself as a documentary filmmaker in New York City. And I asked her if she'd be willing to have a conversation about the possibility of making a film. And eventually I got a response from her. It wasn't immediate. And the response I got was, "Thank you for your email. Thank you for your interest in my story, but I think my life is about as interesting as watching the paint dry, so I'm going to pass." And I wrote her back and I said, "Respectfully, I disagree with your self-assessment, and can we just talk?" That began an on-again, off-again correspondence. The on part was me reaching out to her. The off part was her not always getting back to me. She definitely kept me at arm's length, but she left me just enough hope not to give up. And we spoke on the phone a couple of times. And after each call, I just thought to myself, she's even more incredible than I originally thought. And then I got a direct message from her on Facebook one day. And she said, "I'm in Staten Island. I can meet you now if you want." So for everybody out there in South Carolina, I'm going to give you a very brief geography lesson in New York City. I live on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. Staten Island is a borough of New York City, so it's technically part of New York, but it is really far from where I live. But I got her message and I said, "Give me 2 hours and I'll be there." And I dropped what I was doing and I drove out to Staten Island. And Tamar and I sat down for a couple of hours and we had just a great conversation. And at the end, she kind of shrugged her shoulders and she smiled and said, "I guess if you want to do this film, we could do it this coming summer." And that was it. That's what we did.
So I want to ask a bit about this community that began to grow around this street corner and around you, Tamar, within Chicago. And what's clear to me is that so much of this process of taking on this issue within the neighborhood is predicated upon building a community as an organic grassroots kind of movement that it takes years to cultivate. And so I'm curious to hear from the both of you what you've learned throughout this process about what it takes to build community on a street corner. What are the necessary components? And I think it's really striking to think about what is actually entailed in building a community, particularly now in the midst of COVID, when so much of what we know about community and connection has been disrupted.
Brad, do you want to take that one first?
No, you're the one building the community.
Well, you actually documented it, so yeah.
Well, go ahead, and then I'll chime in.
I think that I wasn't trying to necessarily build a community. It just popped up. It just happened, which told me that whatever it was that I bought there was something that people had been needing, that it was something that was missing. So it was the element of knowing your neighbor. It was actual neighbors talking. It was the human contact. And I mean, in the age of social media, human contact is not all that necessary anymore. I mean, and especially after the pandemic, we found new ways to communicate without actually sitting in a room with one another. So it was the human component of it. It was, giving people what they actually needed, the actual human closeness that they needed, and being able to answer the questions and being able to have the conversations and being able to get to know each other face to face. That is huge. That's a huge thing. And it's kind of like when you give people that, you get security. They got security in that. There's security in knowing your neighbors. There's security in knowing each other. There's security in knowing each other's kids. There's security in that. And so it's kind of like building a community around safety, around giving people a reason to feel safe. And it was commitment. It was consistency. This had to happen every day. This wasn't something that I could do one day and then come back and do 2 months later. This was something I did every day, 7 days a week, rain or shine, every single day. So people absolutely knew that I was going to be there, and I was committed to them, and they were committed to this community that we were building. And now we're kind of seeing that that's popping up everywhere around Chicago, that the need for community, if we say, you build community and you make your neighborhood safer, if we saw that happen in Inglewood, now in places like Hyde Park in Chicago, in Evanston, in Illinois, just, on the outskirts of Chicago, they're now looking to do the same thing, because it's kind of like in a place where no community exists. It's right. You open up the door for crime, for violence. If nobody's talking to anybody, there are always strangers in the neighborhood, but we don't talk to each other and we don't know each other. We don't know that they're strangers. We don't know anything. So it really is starting to catch on in Chicago, in places where it's not violent. It's not typically the violent neighborhoods, and it's not where a lot of poor people live, and it's not where people who, are white collar or blue collar. This is happening in places where you wouldn't expect for it to happen. But even people in those places are realizing, hey, it may be something to this knowing your neighbor thing. It may be something to this building community thing. So, I'm really happy that I hate that it took a rash of violence in some of these neighborhoods in order to wake people up to say, hey, you know what, my neighbor is important, and it's important that I have a relationship with my neighbor. I hate that it took that, but I'm really glad that at least we're there now. Bradford?
Yeah, thank you. From my perspective, I just want to highlight something that Tamar touched on, and that is the consistency and the showing up every day. So that's what I observed in terms of why Tamar is so successful. It's because she's there day in and day out, no matter how she feels, no matter what's going on in her world, she's there. And there's no job on that block that's too small to do. There's no task that is beneath her or beneath anybody. So, and I think we document this in the film, and it certainly was my intention, was to show those little moments, like Tamar dragging the grill out from the storage and grabbing a shovel and helping to shovel dirt, or just raking garbage every morning. And that, to me, is where a successful grassroots organization is built. It's built in those little tasks that nobody notices, but that are absolutely essential. And so when people show up later in the day, the block looks nice. Everything's ready to go. It's not magic. It's hard work. And for an organization to be successful, no matter what organization, you have to have not only somebody with Tamar's vision, because clearly she's so well able to articulate what the organization's vision is, and she is so consistently true to that vision, but it's those little moments that, you know, when nobody's looking, that's when you become successful.
Yeah, and I think there's so many scenes in the movie, Brad, where you can get a sense of the way in which the community, but also the sense of pride of this block corner that begins to grow. There's one little scene, it's so easy to miss it, but there's a man walking by and he bends over to pick up a piece of trash and tosses it in the can and keeps going. And you can tell it's a little bit of effort for this man to bend over. He's a little bit older, but it's just such a simple gesture that conveys so much in that single scene. So I do want to encourage people, if you have questions that you'd like to ask, to begin adding them into the chat box. But for now, what I'd like to do is turn the conversation to Jewishness for both of you. So many of the students in our audience tonight are coming from a course I'm teaching about Jews and the radical left, and we've been having conversations all quarter semester about how radical Jews throughout history, how we can draw correlations between Jewishness and action. And I think it's fair to say, and feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, that Jewishness compels both of you to do the work that you do, whether it be community work or filmmaking. Tamar, you have this beautiful line in the film where you say, Judaism is not where one is from, but what one does. And I think that's particularly striking and really gets to the heart of it. And so I'm curious if you could talk about how your Jewishness has translated into actions in terms of your community work, filmmaking, and so forth.
Brad speaks to the filmmaking part, but as far as my community, I mean, all of this is Jewishness. All of this, every bit of it is Jewishness. You know, from the time literally the movie comes on, like I'm making sandwiches for somebody else's kids. I'm taking care of somebody else's kids. I'm looking out for somebody else. And it's kind of like, isn't that what we're taught? We're taught about, you know, the widows and the orphans, and places like Inglewood is full of widows and orphans. It's a place where there are no men. It is all of these things that we are taught that we're supposed to be as Jews, but it's just, I apply it in a way that most people wouldn't see me apply it. And, you know, perhaps it's because I'm Black and this is a Black neighborhood that I'm in. But mass doesn't necessarily work like other organizations. It doesn't work like other organizations that might be headed by the church or might be headed by the university or something. It doesn't work like that. It does something different, and it does it in a different way. Like the first Yom Kippur that I was out there, I went to service, but I left, and it was a particularly warm day. And in a day that I was fasting, I went to the corner and barbecued, and I wasn't even supposed to be there. The kids were in school. I wasn't supposed to be there that day. But it was like, hey, what are you doing here? And it was like, you know, it's Yom Kippur. And everybody was like, you know, you aren't eating. You're already skinny enough. What do you mean you're not going to eat? And I was like, well, I'm fasting. And it was like, well, you don't need to fast because you're skinny. I said, no, I'm not dieting. I'm fasting. But then that led into a conversation about why on a day when I can't eat, am I here feeding you? And it's because the world does not revolve around me. It doesn't. So even on a day when I'm depriving myself of food, it's still a mitzvah. I'm still commanded to make sure that other people are eating, that the food I'm not eating is going to someone who needs it. And after that, people on the block start fasting with me. Because when we got into the idea, we start talking about what Yom Kippur was, and we start talking about Teshuvah, and we start talking about, you know, being forgiven, and we start talking about, you know, remembering people we lost and what it's like during the Yizkor service, it was really something that really touched a lot of people in a place where so many people have been lost, where they've experienced so much loss. And it was like, so you fasting, it's just the tip of the iceberg of this much larger thing that you do, that you are. So when I go out there, it is me actually, it's me Jewing. It is actually the verb. It's me being a Jew. This is what Jews do. This is not just who we are. This is what we do. This is what it looks like when we apply our Judaism to the world around us. This is what it looks like. And so a lot of people, it doesn't necessarily look like that when other people are quote unquote activists in Chicago. It doesn't necessarily look like, okay, I'm going to get out here and cook you dinner. And, then I'm going to sit and watch a movie with you. And then I'm going to do this every day. It doesn't look like that. But it's different. What they do is supposed to look different because they aren't Jews. And the thing is, it sometimes it's strange to me that when people see me being a Jew, they still have to ask me, what do you do that's Jewish? Like, am I supposed to just keep like a Torah scroll in the trunk of my car and just like jump out and just start reading? Like, what do you do? This is what being a Jew in my world looks like. It's an action. It's an action thing. It's something you do every day. It's every moment of your day. It's who you are. It animates you. It illustrates your whole life. So me, everything that I do it from a place. This is what I was taught to do. This is how I grew up. This is what I learned Jews were when I was growing up. This is what Judaism looked like to me when I was growing up. I mean, you have to remember, Rabbi Funnye is on this call. Service, when I was a kid, service was 8 hours long. And during the break, everybody would cook food and everybody would bring food and everybody would eat together for oneg. And everybody knew who wanted to eat whose pie and who made the best chicken and who made this and who made that. Everybody contributed to that. We all looked out for each other. I grew up doing that. I grew up seeing that, not just at temple, but I saw it at home too. I saw it in my neighborhood. I saw my grandmother do it. This is what I grew up doing. So when I do this, it's the most Jewish thing in the world to me. And I don't understand why other Jews don't see it as being the most Jewish thing in the world.
It's hard to top that or follow that even. As a filmmaker, my Jewishness is a very central part of my identity, and it always has been. But I'm not religious, and I'm not very spiritual. My father was a refugee from Nazi Germany who came to the United States in 1939 with his parents when he was a young boy. And that experience has really, really shaped my generation and my family, because my siblings and I grew up hearing the stories from my father. Also, on my mother's side, there were Holocaust survivors and people who didn't survive. So the Holocaust played a central role, even though we weren't survivors. My father never saw himself as a survivor. He was a refugee. And there's a distinction because he never lived through the ghettos or the camps. He was lucky. He was able to come to the United States before the war broke out. But it really impacted him for the rest of his life, and it impacted us as kids. And I guess my professional and personal search has always been, how does my Jewishness come into play in my life? And after I graduated college, I lived in Israel for 2 years. Somebody I saw in the chat asked the question how I made the transition from being a speechwriter at the Mission of Israel to the UN to doing filmmaking. And it's part of my journey. I tried a few different things. I feel like, being a speechwriter is not that dissimilar from being a filmmaker. It's creative. You use words. Maybe you don't use images, but there's storytelling involved. And that's something that has always been of interest to me. And there's also, of course, the Jewish aspect. So for whatever reason, I'm always drawn to these kinds of stories, to people who are using their Jewishness in ways to improve the world around them. And I guess that's just a reaction to the way that I was raised and the family that I come from. When you see somebody like Tamar, who, like she said, for her, to Jew is a verb. And you don't need to be a Jew in the synagogue or in Jewish day school only. It's wherever you are, and how you behave is what makes you a Jew. I think that's a really important lesson that I learned from her, among many lessons that I've learned from her.
So we're flooded with questions right now, and what I'm going to try and do is group them together to just try and keep us moving along the lines of the same topic. But I think a nice segue from what you're talking about in terms of Jewishness action and also the importance of ritual. We have a question from Shira Fink. Shira, do you want to take yourself off mute and ask it yourself?
Yes, thank you so much. And thank you so much, Rabbi Manasseh, for coming and speaking to us. It's so lovely having you here. So throughout the film, there were a few scenes where it showed you celebrating the Jewish holidays on the corner where you sit every single day. And I was wondering how those holidays and what they represent resonated to the larger community in the area, and also if they in a way helped to build that community.
They do. They definitely in a way help to build a community. I mean, people, after you give people a Yom Kippur, we talk about New Year's resolutions. We talk about what is it that we wanted to, what did we leave in now? What are we going to be like tomorrow? What are we leaving right here? What habits aren't we taking? And I would like to think, honestly, that the level of violence has went down because people strive to be actually better people. It's this idea of being like clean slated on like Yom Kippur, like this book is open, you go, you make confession, you have a talk with God, you lay it all out, you do all of that. You ask for forgiveness and you're sincere. And that's very personal. It's between you and God. And you know what? You can be forgiven. You don't have to wait to die to be forgiven. Like you can be forgiven now. You can change right now. You can have another chance. And these are people who before this radical idea of not having to die to be forgiven, because that's what most people in my community believe, right? That's when you're judged, when you die. That's it. That's it. That's over. That's the only time. But for Jews, it's not like that. Every year you hit the brakes for a minute and you do an assessment of your life, of who you are, of who you want to be. You think it all over. And you're forgiven. You get inscribed in the book of life for another year, and you get another chance to get it right. And that is an amazing thing for people who believe that they have went so far down the wrong path that there is just no way back, that they should just keep on down that path because redemption is not for them. It's out of the question. To present them with that idea is life altering for some people. Absolutely life altering. This year on the block, we had Jermaine. You met him in the movie. He actually blew the shofar for us to close out the service for Yom Kippur. And I mean, like, he was like, hey, do I go on Amazon and buy one of these things for myself? Because I want to be real good next year. That is amazing to me, to see people change their lives because they see what I do. It's not, I don't have to tell you, hey, you know what? You should become a Jew because, the benefits are great. It's not like that. If this is who I am, if this is what my life is like, if this is how I live and I've helped you and I'm motivated to help you because of who I am, and it makes me feel good to help you, and it makes you feel good now to help other people, guess what? You might be becoming a Jew. You might be changing. But Jewish holidays to people in my community, in my neighborhood, are huge. I mean, Passover is the Feast of Freedom. I mean, not too long ago, Black folks were slaves. So that's a real conversation we have to have. Hanukkah is the holiday of freedom fighters. And right now we're having discussions about freedom fighters. We have a lot of conversations about King and Heschel. These are the people that you want to remember during Hanukkah. We want to create new freedom fighters. So every Jewish holiday, there's something in it that speaks to the Black community in ways that people in the broader Jewish community could never even imagine. But it makes perfect sense to the people on that block. They live for Sukkot. Oh, a Sukkah party is the best thing ever. To dance the hora and do the wobble, it is an amazing thing at one time. It's good stuff. But to see the impact that this thing that we have, this beautiful thing that we've been given as B'nai Israel, this thing that we have, to share it with people who don't know that it even exists, and it changes their lives. It is a truly amazing thing. That is the greatest gift that I've received out there on that corner. It's not less killings. It's actually watching lives change because of the life I live. So I understand why Jews don't have to proselytize. You just go out into the world and be a Jew, and it'll do it. Just let the rest take care of itself. That's how that goes. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah. I like to say that there's no better PR for Judaism on the south side of Chicago than Tamar Manasseh.
Okay, we have a question. We have a couple of questions about gender coming in. Kennedy, are you able to take yourself off mute and ask your question?
Yes, I am. Hi, thank you both so much for coming.
Wait, Kennedy, I have to find you. It's like the Brady Bunch. It's like a million. Okay, I see you now. Okay, let's go, Kennedy.
Okay, so in the film, it is clear that you are a matriarch of your community. And I was wondering if you could speak on how Judaism factors into or intersects with the matriarchal role of Black women in our society.
I think in Judaism, the matriarchs, those are teachers. They're teachers. And I mean, for Black women, it's a much stronger role. You're called to be a leader, not just a teacher, but you have to lead. You have to actually, not only teach this, but you have to actually demonstrate it every day in the world. So it's kind of like, one is the study and the other is the actual practice. It's like, this is what you learn. As a Jew, you learn these things, matriarchs, you can teach. That's, before I became a rabbi, that was a discussion a long time ago I had with one of the other rabbis. It was always this thing about, you can be a teacher. Sure, you can be a teacher, but you can't be a rabbi. So you can actually learn all of this stuff. You can teach it to another generation of rabbis, but you can't be a rabbi yourself. And that's the difference between being a matriarch, the matriarchal structure in the Black community and in the Jewish community. So it was a little harder to get past that. And I think it might have been harder. It might have been difficult. And I don't know. Rabbi Funnye can maybe speak to this. It might have been difficult for some of the Black male rabbis to actually move past that too, to seeing a Black woman as a leader and not just a teacher. So, I mean, it's a little different for us. So I think one definitely makes me better at the other, though. I don't know. Rabbi Funnye, do you want to chime in on that?
I think that in the African-American community, the male element with respect to the rabbinate has always tried to fashion themselves in the Orthodox tradition. However, many years ago, I began moving to becoming egalitarian. And one of the reasons that Tamar's ordination really took so long was because I tried to bring the Israelite Board of Rabbis along with this thinking that women have just as much, if not more capacity than men, and that they see things and they see the world in a different light, with a different lens. And I think that for too long, our community has not been able to see the world through this different lens. And now I think we are. I think that our congregation was kind of on the cutting edge of including women in every element of our services, from having Sisterhood Shabbat. Everything. So when we did Sisterhood Shabbat, when women ran all of the services, and I put men in the kitchen and let them take care of the oneg and the lunch and the kiddush and so forth. And the women did everything else. And so for me, it wasn't a challenge. It's a challenge. The challenge is getting other men in the African-American community to see and to understand that we cannot lose so much of the brain power that women bring to our community. And it's a shame. So we have pushed and pushed, and they're beginning to come along. But from on a personal level, our congregation is 102 years old. And so being 102 years old, my oldest daughter was the first woman that was bat mitzvah in our congregation, in the history of our congregation. And she's now 45, 46 years old. And so she went to Jewish day school, and she said, Abba, I went to Jewish day school for all these years. If I'm not going to have a bat mitzvah, why have I been going to Jewish day school? And I went to the senior rabbi at the time, who was in his late 80s, and said, my daughter would like to have a bat mitzvah. And he said, we don't do that. And I literally had to tell him, she's qualified. And I like to tell the story that the Aron Kodesh didn't fall off the wall, the Ner Tamid didn't explode, and everything really remained the same. And the rabbi became very comfortable. He was 89 years old, and I saw him sit back in his chair, and he knew that, you know, the service was in good hands, and this young girl performing her bat mitzvah. So inclusion must be a part of what we do as Jews worldwide. I have a similar problem with the communities that I work with in Africa, where women try to be put on a back burner. But I'm telling them as well, we must move women into the forefront and into the struggle of teaching, of serving as spiritual leaders in the Jewish community. So this is where I am. And I wanted to simply say that Tamar has really been an excellent example of this, but this is who she has always been. She's always been. She used to do a thing where she planted trees in neighborhoods where people had been shot. And she went from reacting to some family suffering to now stepping out and saying, I want to do something before incidents happen, before some young teenager, some young boy or girl loses their lives. And that is the importance that I see in the work that she does on a daily basis.
And Shira, the tree planting was actually based on Tu B'Shvat. It was actually inspired by Tu B'Shvat. So that's where that came from. So every Jewish holiday, it has some significance in the Black community that other people wouldn't necessarily see, other Jews wouldn't necessarily see. But Kennedy, I hope that answered the question, if that worked. Where's Kennedy? I lost her.
It did, thank you.
Okay.
So we have a question from my colleague here in Jewish Studies, Josh.
Hi, thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be here and to have you. And I remember very well when Rabbi Funnye, when you came 15 years ago already, when my first couple years here. So I teach here in the College of Charleston, but I live in Skokie, and my kids have been going to a kibbutz for some 8 years. So I know that community very, very well. You know, both its wonderful parts and its parts that need to be worked on. And so what I wanted to ask you, and I guess for Brad as well, I'll throw him in this as well. When I watched the film, there was a teacher you chose to highlight in the film, somebody I personally know.
Carol Groover.
Carol Groover and her husband, Bill. I didn't want to name names, but you chose. I happen to know that they have some political views about America and race that I was just very surprised you chose to honor them and highlight them in this way. And so what I wanted to ask was if that is a jumping off point to talk about your relationship with Akiba, with the Jewish community of Chicago more broadly, and how how you work with them, how race plays in or doesn't, as the case may be. I belong to Ari Hart's synagogue. He was also featured in the film, but
Yeah.
Unlike the first people, Ari is a real ally, and he's my role model, to be honest. So I'd love to hear just talk about your relationship with the Jewish community in Chicago.
Wow. That was a big question you just asked there.
Very, very specific.
That was very specific. Okay, here's the thing. I have been knowing Carol Gruber since I was 8 years old. And I understand exactly who she is. I know who she is. And she knows who I am. And outside of our politics, we're still people. And the thing about it, Carol and I can't really comment on, her whole family. But I see people who want to be brought along. I don't see people who want to stay in the place that they're at. I think that they are everybody's still growing here. We're all still learning about each other. And I really do commend them for wanting to still learn and to having the views that they've had to even come down to 75th and Stewart the way that they do, to come down to Beth Shalom the way that they do. For my ordination, they actually stayed near the airport and walked to Beth Shalom for my ordination. And things like that kind of go a long way with me. That's a big deal. That says I'm putting forth some sort of effort. I'm trying to do something. I'm trying to build something with you. And sure, it's a lot of people's politics that I don't necessarily agree with. It's a lot of people that I don't agree with. And if you ask me about Akiba, there are lots of things that I don't agree with that went on at Akiba. That's still goes on at Akiba. So, but I believe that people can be brought along. And I believe I'm not dragging them. They are coming willingly. These are people who are saying, you know what, I want to learn more about things that I don't know. I might want to be more open-minded. I'm not going to say, you know what, I'm not going to do that because you believe what you believe. Your politics are what they are. That's on them. That's their business. I don't get involved in that. But if these are people who are willing to say, I want to learn more about you and what you do and the way that you do it. And I'm proud of you. And, I see something in you that I want to see in myself. I can get with that. But my relationship with Akiba and with the Jewish community in Chicago is I'm here and they're here. I don't think about that too much. I don't think about Akiba anymore at all. I don't. I really do hope Akiba has more Black kids, considering there are so many more Black Jews in Chicago and in America, period. I still do not understand why there are so few Black Jews in Jewish day schools. I don't understand it. So if we keep putting our kids in all white Jewish day schools, you're going to keep having generations of Jews who are going to grow up saying, I never knew it was a such thing as a Black Jew. So I'm really hoping that Akiba has changed its ways and they've found a way to let more Black kids in and to be more welcoming to Jews of color in those communities. I really hope they have. I don't know. I don't keep up with it. But anybody that's willing to come along, I'm willing to help them on the journey.
That was beautiful. Thank you. Yeah. And I agree with you completely. And if ever I can be a liaison, I think that'd be a terrific thing.
Yeah, I'll definitely, now that I know you're in Skokie, I'll definitely look you up because you're not far. Not far. Yeah.
If I can be helpful, you let me know. This is great. Thank
Absolutely.
you.
I will. Thank you.
So we have a few more questions. We're kind of running out of time here. Olivia and Zach both asked a question about politics. Olivia or Zach, do one of you want to perhaps pose your question? I'll let you two duke it out on the screen.
I don't know where Olivia. I don't see. She's somewhere. But
okay. All right, Zach, do you want to ask your question?
Sure.
Sorry.
There you are.
It wouldn't let me unmute, but Zach, you go ahead.
Well, I mean, my question was about, there was a guy in the film who urged you, Rabbi Manasseh, multiple times to run for political office. And I think Olivia's question was about how Judaism affects your politics. So I think they do go together.
Yeah. I love him. That man's name is Jesse. And you know what? Just last week, he urged me to run for office yet once again. It's always the same song when I see him. So yes, I tell him all the time. People often ask about him. And I have no desire to run for any public office. I mean, we all look and see the train wreck that American politics is now. So that's not something I want to be a part of. I can deal with violence on the street. I don't need that kind of threat going to Congress. I don't need violence in places where there should be none. So I'm going to stay away from politics for a while. But my Judaism, I do often, think about that. Like, I wonder about certain people, how they can, it doesn't necessarily affect my politics, but I do look at certain politicians who are Jewish and I'm just like, how could this be? You can be a Jew and these could be your views, but people are asking me, how am I a Jew, but you're okay? Because some of the things that politicians, that Jewish politicians do that we see now, and the things that they vote for and the things that they support are the most un-Jewish things in the world. So it does leave me asking, how are you Jewish? So I would like to think that if I did actually get into politics, I would never forget that I'm actually a Jew. And there is a certain way that I do have to approach issues. And it's different from the way other people approach it. It's different from the way that other people see them. There are different things that I have to factor in when I'm making decisions that other people don't necessarily have to think about. So I would like to think that if I got into politics, that I would still first and foremost remember that I am a Jew and that all my decisions should be informed about that, and all the votes I take and everything, it should be informed by that. I should always be reminded that I am a Jew. But as far as how my views on other Jewish issues that are in politics or Israel, I don't really have an opinion about that.
So we have a question from a student who I think can't ask it themselves. So in the film, when you visited Confederate statues in North Carolina and also your family's gravestones, it made me think about the intersectionality of the Black and Jewish experiences. How have you experienced this intersection, and how do you think it plays out in your life and other lives as well?
That was the Confederate monuments actually in South Carolina that outraged me. That's where that was. But the graves were in North Carolina. And I think right now, that experience, I think that is the most relevant thing right now. And I think that's something that we should be talking about as Black people and as Jews. And we've been looking for ways. I always have these questions, these conversations about building bridges between the Black community and the Jewish community. Well, I think with the rise of white supremacy in this country, I think that should be one heck of a bridge builder for Blacks and Jews, because right now we have the same boogeyman under both of our beds. It is the white supremacist. It is amazing. When we were it's a part you don't see in the movie, but when we were in North Carolina filming the movie, the most amazing thing happened. So we're on a back road somewhere in Robeson County in North Carolina. It gets dark. So my mother and I and Brad and the cameraman Dan called me. We're all in the car. We're out in the middle of the country. It's no lights, nowhere. It's pitch black. Brad and Dan say, you know what? We need to get back to civilization. We need to get back to the city. It's dark out here. And I'm like, calm down. We're going to get there. And one of them actually said, people like us, aren't necessarily welcome in places like this after dark. We don't want to get caught after dark out here. And it took me aback because I'm thinking, that's what Black people think. You don't get caught in the country at night down south because bad things can happen. But it wasn't a Black person saying this. It was a Jew saying this. And then me, as being a Jew and being Black, the thing was, it was like, it's almost like they were speaking like he was in my head. And it was like the thing was me being a Black woman, me being a Black American, and him being a Jew, and him being white. And we were thinking the exact same thing was very telling. We were both worried about the same thing for the exact same reason, because somebody doesn't like people like us. So in that, there is more of a connection that than anything. We understand we've both been oppressed, and we will continue to be. This is the monster under the bed. This is the enemy. Just as there were the tiki torchers in Charlottesville marching saying Jews will not replace us. Those are the same kind of people who shot down Ahmaud Arbery. So we have the same problems. We have the same enemy. If we could just actually, when you think about it, those right-wing groups are like multiplying. These hate groups are multiplying like gremlins being fed after midnight. But what are we actually doing on the left? What's happening? What kind of real coalitions are being built on the left? Why aren't more organizations popping up that are bridge building organizations? Because you have to have something to push back against that. Because I don't believe the Confederacy ever failed. I don't believe it ever died. I just believe it morphed into something else. I believe this is Civil War 2.0. It didn't end. It just looked like it did, but it didn't. What we see in Congress, this is not the way a healthy republic functions. So, I still see, that's the connection that I see. I see those very same people that enslaved Black Americans. Those are the very same ones who invaded the Capitol on January 6th. Those are the ones screaming, Jews not replace us. They're alive and well. They're here. And we have to actually come together to push back against that.
That's a very powerful note to end on. I want to ask a final question of each of you, and perhaps we can segue with that final point about looking forward. But I do want to know what's next for each of you. Brad, in terms of the film you're working on or whatever else you might be undertaking at the moment. And then Tamar, not only what's in store for Mask, but also, what's your next move?
Well, since the movie, that lot is no longer vacant. We actually built a school there out of shipping containers, and I'm so proud of it. And it's so exciting to be able to see, kids coming there after school. And during the pandemic, we had kids in classes there every single day, all day. When the rest of the world was in quarantine, we still had kids in the classroom. So I'm really proud that we were able to offer parents who were essential workers, that kind of support. But we are developing all sorts of programming to happen in that neighborhood. And we're looking for that to become an example for other schools like that, other pop-up schools like that we want to build in other cities, on other corners. We want to do more of those in Chicago. We want to make education more accessible to people in poor communities, and poor and rural communities. We want to make sure more kids have access to quality education. So that's what I'm committed to. And Brad and I are working on They Still Ain't Ready for Me, the sequel. And I'm excited about that. So, we're having a good time. It's good. So, there'll be more from us. More is coming. Just you wait. We're not done yet.
Yeah, we're not done. And actually, my immediate next move, it's tomorrow morning. I will be interviewing Rabbi Capers Funnye. No joke. That is my immediate next move, and as part of this follow-up project from this film. So that's why I'm traveling this week. That's why I'm in Chicago this week. And that's why I'm actually excited to get a sneak preview of Rabbi Funnye tonight.
Oh, and Rabbi Funnye, I just want to tell you one thing. Just one thing, Rabbi. When we would do Sisterhood Shabbat and you would put me in the kitchen, the food was never as good as it was when, the sisters actually did oneg. But I can say that now because I'm a rabbi and I get the big piece of chicken. So I can be honest about it now. But yeah, proceed. Don't tell the men I said that, okay? But go ahead.
Never will. I'll keep that. We'll just keep that in-house. But I think that the film and the story about the film and how it was developed by Tamar and Brad really speaks volumes. And it speaks volumes in so many ways. I was doing a Zoom call somewhere in New Jersey or somewhere, and no, New Orleans. And they said, "Oh, do you know Tamar Manasseh?" and I said, "Yes, I know Tamar." So it's one of those stardom things. So knowing Tamar now has become a venue for me to understanding, and thanking Brad for what his work with Tamar, and now so people know me through Tamar. So what can I say? Baruch Hashem.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
I'm extremely happy, but I do want to say that her work is serious. Her work is, she's dedicated, she's committed, and I think that she is a model for any rabbi that would like to see God being a verb in action, because God is a verb.
That's right. You always got to take the last word, don't you? That was beautiful.
I'm going to take the last word back from him, just because as I'm listening to Rabbi Funnye speaking, I'm reminded that when I was in Chicago this past summer for Tamar's ordination, I brought my son with me, and we sat in the sanctuary at Beth Shalom B'nai Zaken, and my son looked at me and he said, "If we lived in Chicago, this is where we would go to temple." And I said, "That's absolutely right."
Thank you, Brad.
And he meant it.
Well, thank you so much. We could have talked for another hour or so, but I'm very excited to hear about the sequel, because it means we have an excuse to bring you in person to CFC, to the city of Charleston. So we'll be sure to do that. But thank you so much. I appreciate it so much for you giving us your time, sharing your wonderful story with us. It's so inspirational. And I think it means so much to me and the students to have something like this, to begin a conversation about the future and about action, and how one can really work to affect change in the world. So thank you so much. I think I'll turn it over to Sandra to say the last final words. Sandra?
I also, on behalf of the Charleston Jewish Film Fest, thank you so much for coming with us virtually. And I echo Ashley's sentiments that we look forward to having you for your next film here. It'll be awesome. And you're such an inspiration to our work here in Charleston, too. So thank you for that. Good night, everybody. Thanks for coming.
Thank you all.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.